Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to show y'all how to make your very own little paddle earrings or pendants in a variety of different styles. Let me get that straightened out. There it goes. So I'll be showing you how to make a triangular one as well as a round one. And you can see they pair really nicely with just about everything. They're very lightweight and fun to wear with a lot of movement. So let's get started. These earrings can be made out of a variety of different metal types, though I do prefer dead soft aluminum. In this tutorial I'm going to be using anodized, and there'll be links to all the different tools and materials that I'm using down in the video description below. But the aluminum keeps it very lightweight, there's no need for polishing or anything, and it's an excellent use of any scrap metal that you might have left over from other projects. I like to use rings for the center. These are chainmail jump rings made out of 16 gauge, and that's in a standard wire gauge, same gauge as what we're using for the metal. And so you'll want some pliers to work with that. The pliers that I'm using today are flat nose, bent nose, round nose, and flush cutters. And I also have a nylon head and steel head ended hammer. I really like this one because it has interchangeable heads, so you could use whatever you like. So I'm going to begin. Also, one more thing before I get started. On this one, I'm using little spacers that are actually jump rings, like how you might get, this is one of the packets that I send out in my monthly craft crates for my Patreon pledgers. But you could use beads if they're large enough, or you could use a variety of different things to fit in between the paddles. But in the tutorial, I'm going to show how you can do it with just the wire without having to involve any spacer beads. So I'm going to come through and working off the spool, which just leaving it kind of intact. I'm going to go through and measure out some sections. And that's what we're going to want to do. Is on this one, I cut first and then hammered. This time I am going to hammer first and then cut. So to get the technique down, and I'm really sorry I don't have a better colored background for demonstrating this, so hopefully you'll be able to see, is I am just laying it on a large flat surface. You could also use an anvil, but this one has quite a bit of texture and stuff on it, and it tends to jump around on me, so I really like my granite slab. And I'm just going to start hammering from the end, and then working my way up, and I'm using the nylon side. And I want to do a lot more hammering towards the tip, and then kind of gradually do less and less. So that way we get a really nice spread just there on the tip. And I'm trying to hammer about 1/2 inch up from the tip. You could do more or less just depending on your own preference, but I'm trying to stay consistent with just that. So now that we have that 1/2 inch hammered, I am going to cut this at 2 inches from the tip. There we go. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. There we are. And again, checking for symmetry. Now you can see on this one here, I started with a flat tip, and this one has a little bit of a pointed tip. That's influenced very much by which side of the flush cutters you use. And the reason why I'm hammering first and then cutting is because that way if you get a result that you're not particularly pleased with, you can come in and you're just scrapping 1/2 inch of wire as opposed to the full, 2 inches. So let's come in again, starting with a flat tip this time. And so you can see that gave us that nice rounded paddle tip that I'm looking for. And so again, now that I've already cut one, I can just hold it up and snip. And I'm using the flat side of my flush cutters. And then I'm going to go in and flipping the pliers around, the cutters around, trim that tip. That way, again, it's a flat end. And so let's see if I can't demonstrate a few times on an anvil to see if we get a different effect, but just so you can see a little better maybe. So again, holding it down and starting in, chasing from the tip in. And you can see how much that anvil's moving around on me. I wish I had a better setup for having it, like, you know, actually bolted down to my work surface. There we go. And this one I'm going to cut at 1 3/4 inches. So I'm going to come in just a bit and snip right there. And I'm going to cut 4 at this length. So I demonstrated on the anvil, but I really prefer a non-moving work surface. So I'm going back to my large stone. There went my pliers. And it's really nice. You can just practice on some scrap wire. There should be a link down in the video description, as well as possibly popping up on the screen, where I went through and practiced on a whole bunch of different little pieces of metal using different tips, and that way you can kind of see the different effects that you can get with different hammer heads, as well as different metal types. So this is definitely something that the more you practice, the better off you'll be. Lining the ends up and snipping, and then trimming the end. And I'm doing this in real time, that way you can see the natural variation that's coming out. I am in no way a master metal hammerer. I don't even know what the word for what I'm doing is, but it's not every piece comes out the same, and that's part of the charm of it. But if you're very meticulous and very careful, then you can kind of pick the ones that are most similar. And again, I'm shooting for, I want a nice gradual development from being flattened to rounded. And I find the nylon head gives me way more control than the steel head does, or even a brass head. Those ones are more of a one hit and go, whereas the nylon lets you really tinker with it. And snipping and snipping. Okay, gonna do one more in this length. That one I feel like paddled out pretty nicely. I really like that gradient. Okay, last one at the 1 3/4 inch length. If you're doing this and you're wondering about different wire gauges, the thicker the gauge, the better, I feel, because it gives you a little bit more material to work with. Like a 20 gauge wire just doesn't have as much material there to spread as you hammer as what a 16 or 14 gauge would. Okay, so now I'm going to do this one at 1.5 inches. Just very little, you know, increments, but I want a very nice slight gradient. So snip and hammer. And now we can line them up next to each other. And snip, flip, and snip. And then snip. And we're on to our last one. I really like that. And you can see this one, I feel like I nailed it. I fine-tuned it. I got a really nice gradient. I got a really perfect shaping. So 1 in 1 in 10 comes out perfect for me. So if you're struggling with it, don't feel bad. We're all there. Okay, I'm snipping the tip of that just for future's sake. And so now oh, it was my red nose that fell. You can see on these pliers, I have marked a little notch in the nose of the blade, or not blade, in the, I don't know, just the nose of the pliers on this part. And that helps me to gauge where I am making a little loop. So on these ones that are the longest, they are going to be our center. And you could use this design, you know, for whatever you want, but the longest one's going to be in the middle and then gradiating up to shorter and shorter. So I'm going to start with just lining it up with the notch on the pliers and then picking the prettier of the two sides. I like this side. So I'm going to be bending away from myself. And I'm just doing an offset loop. Normally, whenever I'm making a loop, I want it centered like a balloon, but these ones, I like having it like a P. Or is that a Q? Hashtag dyslexic. And so I'm going to do that to the other one of the same length. Again, picking the side that I prefer. And also, you can go through with a metal file and really fine tune and shape these. Lining up with the notch on the pliers. If you don't have a notch etched in, you could just use a permanent marker to mark, and it's going to help us to get a very consistently sized loop each time. Or if you have like the gradiated mandrel pliers where it's like large and then medium and then small instead of being like a cone like this, I really need to learn words better, then that would simplify it as well. Okay, so now I'm going to come through and do the next one. And I'm going to demonstrate first, then kind of talk about what I'm doing as I do it. So again, picking the side that I prefer and having that towards me, bracing with my thumb, and then bending around. Now this time, instead of having it meet up to the wire, I'm going to offset it just a bit. That way it'll stack on itself. Bringing my pliers around. And what I'm doing now is that is going to behave as the spacer. And you could have it come all the way around, but I've found that just having it to about there or so is super effective. Because now whenever we have them stacked side by side, it's going to have that there as a spacer. Now something that you want to keep in mind on the next loop though, is you don't want it on the same side on each one. You want a mirror image, not just duplicated. So to do that, I am going to grab one that's of the same size, and lining up with that notch, bring it around, but instead of having it stack on the top, I'm going to have it stack on the bottom. And I keep adjusting my pliers to keep it to where it's going to line up with the notch, because of the way that my pliers are shaped, if I have it grow down the end, it could shrink. If I have it grow up this end, then it could go larger. And I want it to stay roughly the same size. And you can see I'm squeezing a little harder than I ought to, and it's putting some notches into our wire. It's not the end of the world, but I'd like to avoid that if I can. And so a lot of that is to just build up practice and confidence in your work. But you know, if anything, take heart that 10 years into wire wrapping, I'm still doing it. So, don't be too hard on yourself. That's a note to myself as well. I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm wiring up my wire. And then you can also flip it around and just bend it this way. if that's a little easier for you. And I am tweaking this to get it to be the exact same length as this one. There we go. And if you don't want to be able to see the end like that, then you can come in with your flush cutters and just snip like that. And so now whenever they're stacked side by side, it's a little less visible. So these guys are a matching pair, so I'm going to set them off next to their middle piece. And now I get to start on the next one. Lining it up, bringing it around, and I'm going to do the one that I have a little bit more difficulty with first, and that's the stacking this way. And now I'm going to do the next one. Excuse me. There we go. And now, oops, let's check and see and make sure they're the same length. Yeah, that's pretty close. That's good. And now we get to do that same thing again on the last 4. So for these ones, just coming around, doing that same kind of a rotation and a half. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to go off camera. And this time I'm going to do 2 the same and then 2 the other way, just for, that's kind of when I'm mass producing handmade things, it's kind of how it goes, is I'll get that muscle memory going and do them all one way and then be like, okay, time to switch gears and do it the other way. There we are. And that way, I don't know, it allows me to just kind of switch off and enjoy what I'm doing without being like, uh-oh, did I do that right? So now I get to pick and be like, okay, do you guys match? That one's a little long, so I'm going to tweak this one around just a bit to make them the same length as each other. And if you feel like this tutorial's running on pretty lengthy, feel free to check out, I have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Tidbit Tutorials, where you can find shortened down versions of my full-length videos. But my heart is ever with the beginner, and sometimes things that may seem very obvious to you or to me who's been doing this for 10 years isn't so, you know, clear or straightforward to someone who this is their first project. So I will always err on the side of over-explaining than just presuming that you know what on earth it is that I'm babbling about. So, bending that around. And that's pretty good. There we are. And then I'm going to trim this one down. Now also, we're running into, I'm getting a little bit of distortion, which you could do so cool, like holding it and then like adding like a twist effect. So I'm going to insert my pliers and take my flat nose pliers and just kind of grab the whole length and just get it to where it's the right, like, kind of perpendicular maybe, I don't know. I want it to be flat and even, but you could do that same thing and take, this is a piece of scrap that I had done in that other video that I linked to. This is enameled copper, so I'm gonna like twist around so you could take it and have your pliers inserted through the loop. And then wrenching this hand all the way around and this hand all the way around, I'm kind of grabbing. Let me zoom out so you can see my hand position. So super opposite hand positions and then twisting. And then placing it, grabbing as close to the tip as I can and just bringing that around. So you could get, if I had flattened more of it, it would give us like a really cool effect of just having like super twisty, cool, let me zoom back in so you can see what that did. Some super twisty, cool wire effects happening there. But yeah, so please experiment with these tutorials that I do and kind of discover what you do and don't like and what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And, you know, the joy is in the wrapping and in the making. Like, you could string some beads on this if you wanted. Like, you could hammer and then string beads on and then do the loop. That would look really cool. And that's if y'all follow along with my tutorials and want to share pictures of your work with me. You can tag me on Instagram, or you can share it to my wall on Facebook. And you can also share things to my Patreon. You have to have a Patreon account, but you don't have to be a pledger. And the Patreon's so much easier for me to understand how to like navigate and stuff. So I'm much more likely to kind of comment and get back to you over yonder on Patreon. So now we're going to take our rings. And if you don't have rings like this, you could use some of the same wire that we were using for the paddles, and like make your own loop. But I've got it opened like this, and then I'm going to thread on our small paddle. And I want to have these positioned to where they're stacking inwards, because our center paddle doesn't have any. And that way they'll stay kind of equidistant. I'm threading that paddle on, and now threading on our next one, and then threading on our last one. And so you could do this as like an earring or a necklace or any sort of thing. So I'm doing this as earrings, so I'm going to thread on the ear hook, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it. Excuse me. If you were doing it as a pendant, you could just thread on maybe a pre-made bail or another jump ring, and it sits just like that. And they kind of poke like silly out the sides, but you can take it and bend it around. You can see I'm pressing with my thumbnail. You could also use your flat nose pliers, and I'm just giving it a little bit of a bend. And that one I bent too much, so let's bend it back. Control Z. So these don't have to stay straight at all. You can kind of add a little bit of a, just a little bend. Yeah, I like the middle ones without a bend. And there we are. Some nice little paddle earrings. And these ones, the length is a little off because I did more coils on these ones than what I did on the center, but that would leave us the space to add a bead, or you could go through and just trim it off and like try it. Fortunately, I mean, unless you're working with like silver or gold filled, the materials are inexpensive enough that you can really experiment and try a lot of different things. So let's go ahead and assemble the other one and work on tweaking, like getting them to actually match each other. Because if it's a pendant, you don't really have to worry about it matching anything. But for earrings, man, like people, like, I don't know, I always feel super self-conscious if my earrings don't match. Unless I intentionally, you know, made them not to, but okay, so threading on like that. And if you don't like it to where it sticks out quite so much on the sides, you could just do 3 paddles instead of the 5. And there we are. And then threading on the ear hook. And closing that ring. I want to get it just as nice and tightly closed as I can. And whenever I close the ring, I kind of wiggle back and forth and add in pressure towards each other with my pliers. Not so much that, you know, when I was starting out, I would put so much pressure that my pliers would slip and I would, like, you know, graze my knuckles and stuff. But you'll get the hang of it. And sometimes overbending it can help it to line up just perfectly. So there we are. And those ones kind of stick out funny on the sides, so I'm going to just bend a bit and bend a bit. Now also, I've just had an idea of something else that we could do. We could take some of this scrap wire that I have left over, and let me take apart this ear hook, or this earring that we just made, because I had an idea. Because again, it's like my least favorite thing about these is how they spread just a little more than what I want them to. So instead of using a circle, we could come through and use our flat nose pliers. I'm coming in about 1 inch from the end. Actually, let me measure to be absolutely certain. There we are. Got an inch from the end and bend. And then I'm going to thread on all the way onto the end, just like I would have if it were the ring. And you can see I'm just sliding onto the end, getting them stacked next to each other. There we go. And then getting that kind of nice and snug up on each other. I don't want too much wiggle room, but I also don't want it to be like cramped. And then grabbing like so. And give it a nice bend. So there you can see how they would hang just like that. It'd hang a little smoother if I hadn't bent. But yeah, oh man, I'm having all sorts of different ideas of how we could do this, like a whole necklace, like, you know, like 3 inches across of just paddles with such nice movement, maybe bead inlay. And so now from here, I'm going to measure with my fancy ruler from middle school. Another inch. There we go. And now I'm going to come through with my pliers, my round nose pliers, and make a loop that comes around towards the outside. And then flip it around to the other one and make a loop that comes around again to the outside. And I'm not even in frame. There we go. Sorry, I'm just a professional. It's not like I should, you know what I'm doing or anything. And so you could have them back to back and like wire wrap it together, or you could have them overlap each other and take one of these rings. This is an 18 gauge 1/8 inch aluminum ring. Like the possibilities here for this design really are endless. You can take this foundation technique and apply it to all sorts of different things. But yeah, and so you can just put a ring through both layers. And then I'm actually going to add another ring because I like for them to lay flat against the earrings, like against the ear hook. Boop, just like that. But you could make a little figure 8 component out of wire if you didn't want to use the jump rings. And just like that, you guys, you have a nice little style. And for some troubleshooting for you, if you don't like how long this middle one is, let's come in and I'm going to trim it about right here with the flat point. So you can see in relation to the other stuff, to the other paddles. Cutting it just a little further, right there. And now I'm going to try re-hammering this. I'm coming off the edge of my work surface. There we go. And I'm going to start hitting it with my hammer. There we go. Oh, I should have flipped it over because all of my other ones have the metal texturing on the back side. Ah, oh well. It is what it is. And there we are. So now you can have a nice little fan earring like that. Or like this. Talk about asymmetrical earrings. What was I saying about trying to keep them symmetrical? Hey y'all, thanks so much for hanging out with me for this video. I hope that it was helpful to you and kind of got your creative juices flowing. I know that I'm really excited to try out a bunch of different designs using this technique. So if you want to see pictures of that, please check me out on Patreon, DeviantArt, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. There'll be links to everything down in the video description below, and that's the tools and materials, all of my social media and websites and stuff, as well as my Etsy store if you'd like to purchase some of your own handmade by moi. And then also, I don't know if I already said this. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please leave them down below. Sorry, this is like my 4th video to shoot in a row today. So I'm like, did I already say that 7 times this video? Anyways, I do though. I really appreciate all of y'all's support and everything. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe so you can stay up to date with new tutorials, and like, that way I know which videos are best received, and maybe share with your friends if you think they might enjoy this. And also, I had mentioned some of the different materials that can be received in my monthly craft crates. So if you're interested in that, please check me out on Patreon. Pledges start at just $1 a month, and we do behind the scenes access, digital download content, the monthly craft crates that are way more than just a little bag, but it's a bigger bag. But yeah, thanks guys. I hope you have a beautiful day, and until next time, happy crafting. Bye.